is a senior specialist of education with World Bank. Anna is a senior educational specialist that has a global practice. Her work supports educational projects around the Middle East and Africa. She specializes in education system reform, pedagogy, school leadership, teacher professional learning, school effectiveness, inclusion, curriculum reform, education evaluation, and improvements. She has extensive educational knowledge and experience gained from working for over 30 years with children, young people, and adults across early years, primary, secondary, special education throughout UK, Europe, the Middle East, and South Asia. Whew, yes, Anna holds a master's degree in psychology and business administration. So let's give her a warm welcome. And again, make sure you ask questions as they come up throughout the presentation. Thank you so much, Anna, for being here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and it's really lovely to be building on the work of other colleagues already here. Let me just share my screen. Thank you so much. I think this is a really timely and important area of inquiry, and I'm going to present some of the World Bank's work and also that of international organisations. I wanted just to say quickly something about the World Bank. It's been actively supporting education projects and programmes since 1963, and we're now engaged in well over 90 countries. And since the turn of the century, the World Bank has committed over $73 billion to supporting educational programmes and projects. And so we've been doing a lot of work. I'm going to look at a number of publications, and I've got a reference section at the end with links to all of these. The first one I'm going to look at is Learning Recovery and Acceleration. And I'm also going to look at the Rapid Framework for Learning, Recovery and Acceleration, which was developed by a range of colleagues and organisations. In exploring experiences, best practice and suggested solutions, which was my mandate, I'm going to primarily focus on our work and that of low and middle income countries. I'll look at the lessons we took from COVID, so I'm going to go back a year or so. Strong links between well-being and the effect of learning, and the important roles of teachers in supporting well-being of learners, and the need for them to be supported in their own well-being. So I'm going to be reinforcing a lot of the points that perhaps you've already heard. I also want to look at some of the guidance we've developed in what we're calling safer schools and how safe school guidance can really support. And finally, a brief overview of our work and those of our many partners in supporting teaching and learning in fragile and conflict and violence affected settings. So learning poverty. The pandemic crisis resulted in an unprecedented global disruption of school and learning. And at the peak of lockdown, 1.6 billion children in 188 countries were out of school. The length of the interruptions were different between high-income countries. They were inclined to open faster than some of the low and middle income countries, where nearly 1 billion children missed out on at least one full year of schooling. And as a result, we have a challenge ahead. The learning poverty rate, which is explained on the slide, has increased significantly and could now be as high as 70%. And the learning poverty rate is about the ability of a child to read a simple text by the age of 10. So if children can't do that, we say that there is an instance of learning poverty. However, on a more positive note, we've also had confirmed at scale what many of us already knew directly from our work and research, that the role of teachers was paramount, way beyond the simple transference of knowledge, social interaction, positive relationship with peers, and teachers in school were fundamental to positive well-being and as a result effective learning. So making a really strong link between positive well-being and effective learning. The Rapid School Framework looks at 5 main buckets, and it was developed in response to school disruptions in part of the pandemic. It makes sort of common sense, but also is enshrined in research. So the idea is to reach every child and keep them in school. Assess their learning levels on a regular basis. Prioritise teaching the fundamentals, so we're talking about literacy and numeracy, and increase the efficiency of instruction. And lastly, but not least, develop psychosocial health and well-being. We're going to focus primarily on the 5th bucket, but you will recognise that there's close dependencies between these policy areas. So by focusing on one area, you're tackling quite a few of the others. To transform education, school systems must monitor, address and prioritise learners' and educators' mental health and psychosocial well-being, full stop. A whole society approach involving collaboration across sectors, including education, child protection, health and nutrition, will be needed to ensure children and youth receive comprehensive services while education systems build better going forward. So there's a big challenge required. And some of that is clarified by looking a little bit in detail at the data. The World Health Organization estimates that the pandemic triggered at least a 25% increase in the global prevalence of anxiety and depression in the first year of the pandemic, with young people affected most. The negative impact of the pandemic on children and youth psychosocial health and well-being is linked to several factors. Obviously, the isolation due to social distancing, so they couldn't mix with their friends and peers. In some countries, experiencing violence, death and illness among family members, and concerns for family income loss and health. Women and girls and youth were the hardest hit. And in the first year of the pandemic, global cases of depression and anxiety are estimated to have increased by 53 million for women and girls and 76 million for youth. In a survey undertaken during this period in 21 countries with 20,000 phone interviews, 1 in 5 15 to 24-year-olds self-reported often feeling depressed or having little interest in doing things. And if you look at the spread of the countries, they're perhaps not quite where you would expect them. We're going to be looking at an example from Ethiopia later on, so that's quite encouraging. But if you look to see where the UK and the United States are, that's quite interesting dynamics. And perhaps in some cases, a little bit unexpected. And I'm dying to know more about what Spain do. Practitioner experience and the data are now in line, and we know and can provide robust evidence that positive psychosocial well-being is imperative for effective learning. I know that practitioners always felt that, but now we have data at scale and building on that research. And now is the time where psychosocial health and well-being is taking on an importance that it lacked before. I'm just going to quickly put up a really happy, smiley picture because I know a lot of my data is quite depressing. And I just want you to show that there is sort of light at the end of this tunnel. I'm going to look at 2 examples of fostering positive health and well-being, and they're going to look at 2 of the barriers, that particularly in low and middle income countries, reducing the stigma around psychosocial health is very important, and the ability to foster students' social emotional skills. And we've heard a lot about that at today's sessions. So, reducing stigma in Ethiopia. Ethiopia began in 2011 to introduce what they termed a speed school model, which was an accelerated learning programme for children aged 9 to 14 that delivered the first 3 years of the curriculum in just 10 months. In northern Ethiopia, conflict broke out in 2021, and as a result, teachers, families and students were, and still are, coping with loss, stress and trauma, and many children missed schooling. Therefore, the Speed School programme was adjusted to be more about remediation and incorporate activities to develop psychosocial health and well-being of teachers and then, in turn, students. So before training the students, teachers were giving specific activities to help them recover so that they had the resilience and capacity to work with the children. And these activities included expressing deep sympathy for one another, having a moment of silence and tears for the wartime losses they experienced, time for hope to regain resilience, and the opportunity to speak about their emotions. Quite an unusual curriculum in that particular course. Teachers were trained to support students through activity-based learning and focus on healing and how to make school a safer place, because we know that if children feel safe, their learning is better. The second example is from Colombia, and there was a programme about emotions for life that had been implemented in 4,500 schools and served a population of approximately 2 million primary students, so a very extensive reach. The objective of the programme was to strengthen students' social emotional skills through raising teachers' awareness, strengthening teachers' capacity to build student skills, and motivating teachers to teach those skills in the classroom. An impact evaluation was undertaken and the following key lessons emerged. So the first one, continue with social emotional development strategies, which is always good to hear. Develop the social emotional learning skills of teachers and their capacity to develop student skills in turn. Work on a whole school strategy so that it wasn't just one teacher in one class, so that children from grade 1 to grade 6 had that opportunity to develop and progress in their social emotional development. And include the participation of families and particularly involve vulnerable population. The programme was scaled nationally in 2021, and we're looking forward to hearing more about the impact and effects from that. We've heard quite a lot about teacher wellbeing, and I just want to reinforce that with some reflections that the World Bank got from the World Teachers' Day in 2022. We convened a group of educational leaders to reflect on the lessons that they had experienced in terms of teacher wellbeing. And their message was simple and powerful. More than ever, effective teachers are the single most important factor to ensure students learn. So they were acknowledging that not only was the teacher an important resource, but they made a huge difference to the daily lives and life chances of students. We got 4 important takeaways from that discussion, and I'll just leave them up there for a second or two for you to read. And they should be part of any pathway to solutions that we're investigating, because we need to ensure that teachers are okay before children can be okay. I've also included 2 examples of where countries have started to begin to look at the needs of teachers and to take that seriously. The first example comes from Mexico, and it's a holistic wellbeing curriculum focused on supporting teachers. And the second one from UNICEF is an example of valuing and incentivizing teachers, and that's in Macedonia. And all the links and references are there, so you can go into this in more depth. And I want to move on to Safe Schools, which is part of the World Bank's programme to assist countries to design and implement sustainable safe school policies and practice. So when we say safe schools, what do we mean? Schools are safe when all students, teachers and staff can thrive in a welcoming environment that supports learning, health and well-being and positive relationships. Schools are any setting in which learning occurs. So a very broad definition of schools. It can be virtual or in person, formal, informal, or under a tree. So we're casting a very broad picture of what being safe might be. First of all, apologies, because I know this slide is a little unclear, but in short, safe schools have 5 measurable characteristics. Physical safety, where risks that can cause bodily harm or on their journeys to and from school can be removed. Mental health and well-being, where we're preventing negative stress and symptoms of anxiety, depression, and other negative thoughts and feelings. Instructional practice and the environment, where learners, teachers, the context, the equipment interact to enhance the learning experience and promote inclusion. Interactions and relationships, and last, school connectedness. So the idea of partnerships and engagement with the families and communities. So those elements combine to make a safe school or a school safer. Again, more information is provided in that through the references. So this is sort of a quick journey through a number of developments that are ongoing within the World Bank and with some of our international partners to support health. And I want to turn to a very important area, particularly today, and to include the work of colleagues across many international organisations who are supporting the significant needs of children and families in fragile and conflict-affected settings. We don't have time to go into this topic in great depth. However, in the report Preparing for Tomorrow, as the report title suggests, I want to establish the size of the challenge. By 2030, more than half of the poor and 2/3 of the extreme poor will live in situations of fragility, conflict and violence. An enormous number of people involved in that. But on a more positive note, we also want to look at the lessons we are learning from this experience and the evidence we are gathering about what works in education terms for the increasing number of children growing up in what we call FCV contexts. So positive lessons from the field. Having clear national policies of inclusion and targeted support for refugee students has been cited as some of the best practices to ensure academic success of refugees. For example, in Turkey, more than 1 million of K-12 Syrian children and youth have been integrated into government schools and are benefiting from general education. And Turkey owes the success of this integration to a phased, gradual transition of Syrian refugees from temporary education centres to mainstream schools. So that's the movement from separate provision, probably low-grade separate provision, into being part of the country's school system. Countries like Sudan and Chad have supported refugee integration in a different way by gradually transitioning non-formal schools to government management, and they've been hiring teachers for these schools. In Uganda, which hosts the largest refugee population in Africa, the World Bank is supporting the transition of schools from humanitarian service providers, which would be involved much more about health issues, to government systems to ensure sustainability and inclusion. It's also crucial to build the capacity of teachers and schools to try and help them lead integrated classrooms and deliver quality instruction. And the World Bank's been working in the Cameroon recently and have helped the government hire 9,000 primary school teachers and train 60,000 teachers in appropriate pedagogies and topics such as education in emergencies, gender-based violence and psychosocial support, so they can begin more clearly to support those children. I think what I've outlined is both in learning and in psychosocial support, we have got a considerable challenge ahead of us, and the picture changes on a daily basis. However, we are gathering, and we've heard from colleagues speaking today, a wealth of evidence about the approaches that work. and what can make a difference, not only to the child tomorrow, but into adulthood, as our first speaker told us. So I think it's very important that we use this evidence, that we talk about the strength of the evidence that we have been collating, and to ensure that the wellbeing needs of teachers and of children are included in all of our programmes going forward, and not perhaps as they were in the past, an afterthought. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take any question. Those are the references that I was talking about, and I can probably put them into the chat if that's more helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. What a great presentation, lots of information packed in there. And there's one question I have for you, and it has to do with how we protect our students' well-being when current incidents around the world are so very distressing.
That's a very, very tough question. I think, as we've also been hearing, that it depends on the context. It depends if the situation is just beginning, if it's been ongoing for some time, what is going on in their family. You know, we have seen sort of pictures, and not just in recent conflicts, but in earthquakes and in some of the flooding going on, where parents can't protect their children. So you're seeing parents who are distressed, and if parents are very distressed, then it's very hard to help children feel safe and then feel happy and to do the things that children would normally do. So it's a very complex, and I wouldn't give you a quick answer, because I think that the topic requires more thought. I think that there are an organisation like UNICEF and UNESCO, through play and through early developments, are reducing trauma, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about reducing trauma in the beginning, and then hopefully beginning as things get more stabilised. If we're talking about floods and earthquakes, as people, we get some shelter and get more regular food, and then things settle down. And then once you've got shelter and food, you can begin to focus on what's going on the inside. So not an overnight solution, a very sort of slow, long-term solution is required. Thanks, Abdul.
Got it. So it's very comprehensive. I just want to thank all of our expert panelists for today, for all of your wisdom that you've shared in really just going at these complex challenges and problems, but